Welcome back to Not So Trad Wife. I am Charlie Doll, and today we have here with us Mr. Devyn Stone. Devyn, could you introduce yourself?
Yeah. I am many things. They affectionately refer to me in my inner circle as the kinky mad hatter. So I'm a lot of stuff. Above most things, I am a trans man, a dominant, an owner, a leather master, and I run a couple of things. I'm the executive producer for Thrive. I'm the founder and main operator for Pragmatically Kinking. I'm an author, full time BDSM educator, alternative lifestyles coach, and Jedi consultant.
So, how do I learn more about the Jedi consulting? Can I find that at your
Jedi,
website?
Jedi is one of my favorite, like, I don't know how it happened, but folks were getting really interesting with the acronyms when it came to inclusion coaching.
Okay.
And so they came up with Jedi for justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion.
Okay.
I
All right,
love
that makes a lot more sense
it.
to my small brain. Okay, so today we're going to be talking about negotiating specifically for authority transfer relationships. So I think my first question for you is what is the difference between negotiating for authority transfer and negotiating for like a regular romantic relationship?
I think a lot of it really boils down to the control, right? In most in most egalitarian relationships, we'll get to know each other a little bit, and we'll kind of figure out, yeah, I like you. This sounds good. You might negotiate things like sex or S&M if that's involved in your relationship, but typically there's not really a lot of negotiating with things like just everyday interactions or handling things like finances or family or anything like that, because for the most part in an egalitarian relationship you're together and like each other and you're just chilling. In an authority transfer relationship, we're using conscious power inequality, and or authority transfer or power exchange, however you choose to refer to it, but the basis of that usually is either control or service, and both of those things are usually helpful to negotiate.
I would say so, yeah. Okay, so what got you interested in authority transfer?
I have a really weird origin story into kink and MS and OP dynamics. I started out on the right side of the slash. So I started out as a slave. I had a guy walk up to me when I was a freshman or sophomore in high school, and he just pointed at me and he said, "You're my slave now." And I said, "Okay."
In high school. You and I had a very similar high school career.
And for a good 7 or 8 years, I was in that dynamic. I went after school. I went over to his place, and we did slave training. I did service training. I learned food service and tea service, and a whole bunch of other fun stuff. And in my vast journey as an adult, I started to discover that I probably wasn't a slave. Um,
Yeah, that was very shocking for me to hear.
Eventually I figured out, I don't actually like receiving orders or serving people. I kind of just did a lot of that out of a pretty constant fawn response that I was stuck in since probably like mid elementary school. And so eventually in about 2015-ish, my ex-husband and I parted ways, and that created a catalyst for me to really re-examine my life and kind of figure out, like, why am I so incredibly unhappy? And one of the major things that I discovered was that I was a dominant living in a slave's life, um, and I was a man living in a woman's life. And so there were a lot of like really radical changes that happened, kind of in a small period of time. And as I started to discover what I wanted, and tried to seek my own slaves, and looking for people to serve me, I kind of started to get into this concept of authority transfer, which wasn't really based on service or sex or S&M or romance. It was really based on the idea of control and authority. And so now I live in a wonderful house, a great neighborhood with adorable dogs, and my two wonderful slaves, my property and my doll.
I love that for you. Okay, so what is something that you have found you've had to add to negotiations that you didn't think you would have to?
Oh man, so many things.
Let's hear it.
I feel like when I first got started and talking about these things, and like I kind of fell into these relationships when I first started. It was just
It
kind of like,
really
oh,
does happen sometimes. Like, you're like, oh, like people will be like, how long have you been in the community? And I'm like, well, I was doing some things. I wish I'd had a little more guidance, but like it kind of gets like you get dropped in the lap of kink and they're just like, go.
right. And so much of the advice that I got from people that were older than me or had more experience than me was like, just do what feels right. And, just stand up for yourself when you need to, do what you're told. And then when I switched to the dominant side, they were like, oh, you just tell the S types what you want, and you just tell them what to do. And there was no conversation about consequences or other people's feelings.
Responsibility.
Like just nothing. They were
Love
just
that.
do what feels right, which as an autistic human is
That
not my
is like
thing.
it's good advice. However, comma, if you implement it with non-autistic people, they will hate you and then you will feel even worse about being autistic. Like, and I'm just like at the point where I don't even want to talk to non-autistic people. It's so much easier.
Yeah, same. I feel like getting into some, especially some of the early relationships I was in as a dominant, I had this concept of like, I'm going to have a process, right? Like, we're going to sit down and we're going to talk about what we want, what we like, what we're both looking for. And we're just going to get down to like bare bones right out of the gate. Cause I'm not doing this 6 months from now I want you to cut your hair and you're taking my collar off. Like we're not going to play this game. And so for me it kind of started with what do I want to control, what do I care about when it comes to how another person that is supposed to be following me lives their life. And for me, the answer was absolutely everything. I care about absolutely everything. I don't necessarily have to have complete control and responsibility over absolutely everything, but I care about absolutely everything. I care about what they look like. I care about how they talk. I care about where they go, who they spend time with, what they do with their own body, what they do with other people's bodies. I care about a lot. And so for me, I think some of the things that I forgot or didn't really pay attention to in the first place were things like communication styles and conflict resolution processes, right? Because I think in the beginning, my brain was on this track of like, but we like each other and we are very compatible and we know each other. And so obviously we're never gonna like break up or fight or like disagree about anything ever. It's going to be like rainbows and sunshine and butterflies. And it's going to be fine. Um, and then I had my first fight with my first S type and was like, oh shit, I did not plan for this. I don't
That
know
was
what to do.
not in the blueprint.
It was not. I had this whole, you know, giant breakdown of like, I can basically do whatever I want to this human, and I am a very aggressive person when I'm angry or when I feel hurt. So now here I am like yelling at this person that belongs to me that I'm supposed to take care of, and they're telling me that they don't want to be yelled at, and I'm telling them I can do whatever I want, and I'm like, okay, pause,
Something has gone wrong.
there's a problem. And so we kind of sat down and hashed out our current disagreement that was happening at the time, and then later sat down and talked about, okay, what are we going to do when this happens in the future, right? She was the kind of person that needed to go like cool off, take a walk, kind of that internal processor kind of human, and I'm an external processor kind of human, so I'm like, let's talk about it. And with me having the upper hand in our relationship, which, like, let's get real, D types have the upper hand. So I'm sitting and telling her, I want to talk about this right now. I want to have this conversation. Don't walk away from me. And she's looking at me like, I need to go take a walk. I need to think about this. I need to get my words together, because if you make me sit down and talk to you right now, I'm just going to explode. And then you're going to explode and it's going to be a mess. But I get what I want. That's part of the deal here, right? So we just get in this back and forth, back and forth. And finally I said, all right, here's what we're going to do. We're going to create a protocol for when we have a disagreement, you go take a walk, I call friend, I process externally with my friend. I yell and I cuss and I get out all my frustration and all the things with somebody that, is consenting to it. And you go take your walk and cool yourself down and have your moments to get your thoughts together. And then we come back to the table and we talk. And that was for me the start of like, okay, what else did I not pay attention to? Right. So now I'm thinking about conflict resolution. I'm like, oh shit, I didn't really think about like communication styles in general, like internal versus external processor. I didn't think about apology languages. I didn't think about like personalities. I didn't think about all this shit. And so I eventually wrote a book about all the shit that I forgot. And I started using it for reference for myself. And then eventually somebody talked me into publishing it. So I did that. But for the most part, I really needed, especially being an autistic human, I needed a process. And I needed like bullet point conversation topics. I needed like, we need to talk about this, we need to talk about that, we need to talk about that. And so for me, it's kind of become a whole other part of these relationships is the negotiation process, and kind of going in stages of taking over the control as it's being agreed to, in this like step-by-step process, instead of just, okay, you're my slave now, here we go. And for me, it helps me readjust. And I have a really hard time in the beginning of authority transfer dynamics in general, because I go from being this person's friend to basically being their boss. And I can't make that transition overnight. So
No,
I like
you
those
shouldn't try
baby
to.
steps. I like those baby steps of like, okay, we start out on equal footing. We start out with, we're equals in every way. And then we start slowly, changing positions, with me going up and them going down. And for me, it kind of helps me to understand where I'm at in that relationship and what I need from that person, and how we're going to make things work in the future. And now I definitely think about things like breaking up and conflicts and the shit that like when the magic wears off, like there are these things you have to deal with. So that's for me.
Yeah, I mean, this really got me thinking. I've had like these situations where, like you mentioned, like power exchange, authority transfer. I've had these situations where, like, as an S type, I will be trying to serve a dominant. You know what I mean? Like, I'll meet a dominant person and I'll be like, yes, perfect. You like me, I like you. Like, let's do something. But then they are not used to being served and don't want to be served. They're used to not being served. So I think it's important to factor into your negotiations partner selection, because even though like you might love someone and want a dynamic with them, it might not be the dynamic for that person, and it's important to not force people into a
Right.
role that they don't identify with.
Absolutely. And I think that like, there's also when it comes to people not being used to things, especially in the authority transfer realm, for me, a lot of it boils down to like, is this something that you want, you're just not used to? Or is this something that you just don't want? Right. Because there are people out there that have never experienced a relationship like this, or even an interaction like this, so maybe they do want that, but they don't know how, or they don't know what their particular brand of this is. And then there are people that, it looks cool on the outside, and then they get in it and they're like, ugh, you know what? I don't like this. I don't like being in charge, or I don't like not being in charge. This is just not my thing. And I think that a lot of it comes down to the practical application, especially in these relationships that are, there's nothing better or worse about a 24/7 or a part-time dynamic, but in general, I find that in 24/7 dynamics, we start to hit that wall a little harder because we
Yeah.
expect that all the time, and if that's not what that person is into or really wants, I also think a lot of people feel really pressured to get into 24/7 dynamics, even
That,
if
and I
they
feel like
want.
people are pressured into MS over DS. And I'm like, okay, so you feel that too? I'm not like,
We've accidentally, I think,
we've
we've
like pushed for
accidentally,
acceptance so hard that we're like, oh, like DS isn't real authority transfer. It's not real power exchange. And I'm like,
yeah,
no, it is. It's like half of the community actually was started on that. Like,
right.
and as we grow and explore more of like our offsets, that doesn't mean we have to like that.
I think a lot of it is because, kink and authority transfer dynamics being an alternative lifestyle dynamic has kind of accidentally created its own relationship escalator,
It
um,
really has.
like on accident. Because I think that a lot of us were really like, I don't really want that. Like, we date for a while, we get married, we have babies, we buy a house in the suburbs kind of life. But the security that comes with, I know what's coming next and I know how this builds, um, really kind of got stuck in a lot of authority transfer in just community perspective, right? Like, I've heard so many people introduce themselves at munches and say like, I'm a submissive, I'm not a slave quite yet, I've not made.
Yeah, they're like the most useful information I've ever heard was I was at someone's class and they said MS is not the deepening of DS. And I was like, you're fucking right. Like your relationship is whole as a DS model. Like you don't need we've gone on a tangent, but that's okay. I
That's,
like
we
it.
went together, it was okay.
Yeah, no, it worked. It worked. If I hadn't said anything, we could have pulled it off.
But yeah, I think that, we've accidentally gotten into that, like, you have to do this a certain way, regardless of what it is. Even my slave just taught a class at Southeast Leatherfest called the Service of Attunement. And part of the reason that it built the class was because it's not a service oriented submissive. So, when we would hang out with other people that were in these types of relationships, they would talk about like bringing their master coffee or, making their mommy breakfast. And my slave is just like, I don't do any of those things. Like, am I doing what I'm supposed to do? I feel like I'm
Are
not.
you doing what your master said? Because then, yes.
Right. And there's that kind of pressure that, like, if you're not service oriented, then what are you doing?
Yeah.
And so my slave kind of created this idea for a class and built this to kind of explain, like, if service in the like hard skills kind of way is not your bag, there are other opportunities to serve your person if you want to do serving that is not hard skill service. And I think that there's so many areas that we get stuck in like that. Like, I, for instance, in both of my relationships, I don't do punishment and rewards. Um, and that's a huge thing in just in general in authority transfer society in our culture, is like, yes, we punish the slaves, we reward the slaves, we reward the submissives. And I'm over here like, I don't do either of those things. I'm in a relationship with human adult people. And so their reward is, I am happy and our relationship is good. Their punishment is, I am angry and disappointed and our relationship is not so great right now. That's just reality. I don't need to do the things. But any D type conversation or discussion group or support group that I've ever been in, when we get to that topic of punishment reward, and I say I don't do that, people look at me like I suddenly have four heads, and
Yeah.
I'm just like, but that's
I
not
think I think
for
that people
me.
hear like I don't do rewards and they're like, "Oh, you don't care for your slave," which is not what you said. But sometimes people be hearing things that you didn't say.
Right, right. I think somehow I have a mouth somewhere on the other side of my skull that talks to those people specifically. That's not what I said, but somehow that's what they heard.
No,
Um,
for real. I'm like, no, I didn't say that. My slave is I mean, I'm speaking metaphorically. I don't actually have a slave. I have a submissive who I love dearly, but like my slave is fulfilled. Like they're doing what they entered this relationship to do. This relationship, like you said, this is the reward. Is I'm happy, things are going well. Our relationship that we agreed on is progressing. That's the reward.
Right. I
And
think
I
that
also think like, I mean, man, this is going to be hard to word as an autistic person where it makes sense in my head and then I'm going to say it and everyone's going to be like, "What, Charlie?" But for me, I am not a dog. Like you don't need to present me with rewards for me to obey. The whole point of that is positive reinforcement. However, like if our relationship continues to go down like the railroad of like progression that we agreed on, then I'm happy because then I have security. I know like you said you were going to do this if I did this and then you did it and that's good. My brain likes that.
right.
But you don't have to like good boy, good girl me through everything. And like and if you bad boy, bad girl me through everything, like then I'm at the beginning of an MS relationship, like you are very much scurrying to adapt yourself to serve this person, right? Like you absolutely change something, not like your core, but you adjust your behavior to suit their needs.
The window
And
dressing, I like to call it.
yes, yes, absolutely. And so if you start out that relationship with punishments and rewards, then you're very, very soon going to have more punishments than rewards because the person doesn't know what they're doing yet. You guys just got together, you just started this dynamic. And I feel like that can almost like add a barrier at the beginning of the relationship because you're like, oh, I'm a bad slave. I did this wrong. I have all these punishments. Master hates me. So yeah, I kind of like appreciate the like if you did something wrong, I will tell you and we will talk about it and I will show you how to correct it. Other than like you did bad and now you don't get to play video games. Like fuck that. I'm gonna play video games anyway and then I'll get in trouble. And I'm not even a brat. Like you know this.
Yeah, and I think that like there's a lot of conversations around when I'm negotiating. A lot of what I want to talk to the person about is like, what are your motivations for doing this, right? Like, what do you want out of this relationship? Why this type of relationship over every other type of relationship there is, you know? And I think that in those conversations, I start to discover whether or not that person is looking for the same thing that I am. I love that there's somebody out there and a relationship style for everybody in the world. There's something for everybody, and that's fantastic. And when I have conversations with people and they're like, I talked to somebody while I was in search for an S type a year or so ago before I met my doll. One of the people that I was talking to said, I really want to be in an MS relationship because I lack internal motivation and I want somebody to, force me to do the things that I don't want to do. And for me, I'm like, that sounds like something that is going to work for you in, what you've described to me as your current life and what you want. But that's not me as a dominant. That's not who I'm going to be as your master, your dominant, your daddy, your whoever. That's not my bag. I live a very busy life and I have really high expectations for my S types, but I like low maintenance S types that basically self propel. That is my personal preference. So I'm not the type that's going to wake you up and tell you, get out of bed. It's time to do your job. I'm just going to get out of bed and go do my job and then walk upstairs at some point in the day and be disappointed that your job's not done. And that's a recipe for disaster, you know.
Oh yeah.
Um, so for me, like having those conversations is critical to be able to say, well, that's cool for you, but that's not what I'm offering. That's not who I am. I can't do that. And I think that for me, in my experience as somebody that's lived on both sides of the slash, it was much easier for me as an S type to admit that like I can't do something or that's not really who I am or that's not really what I can provide to you. It's been much more difficult to say out loud, I can't give you that as a person in a dominant position.
That part right there, especially, I'm gonna go off on my tangent because we're a few days after Juneteenth and it's Pride. So here we go. Um, I can't get over how many people will look at me as a most of the time like femme black person and be like, Dommy mommy, like, and then they're like, I want to serve you. And I'm like, okay, you don't even fucking know me, but let's play. Like, what do you want? And they're like, oh, like, I want to service you. Like, I want to do all these things sexually to please you. And I'm like, that's great. I'm asexual. So I'm not interested. What you really meant was, this is my fetish and you're going to help me get off. And that does not leave me in the place of power. And I am not interested in it. Like, you want most of like the service that people can provide me, they don't want to provide because it's fucking, it's annoying shit. That's why I don't want to do it. Like, I need you to come organize my room. I need you to come manage all of my like appointments and like fill out stupid applications that I don't want to fill out. I need you to like message my family if I don't want to talk to my family right now. Like, I don't I don't need you to come paint my toenails with the brush in your mouth. I don't need you to like put your booty or put my booty in your face and like worship it. I don't want I don't want to peg you. That no interest to me whatsoever. Like, that is such a, I don't know, pegging in general. I'm just like, your dom must really love you because they're getting nothing out of this sexually. So like, and even if we did have sex, he wouldn't do it the way I wanted. Like, I'm just not. Can you bring me something real? Can you talk to me and see like what kind of a person I am? Half the time we don't even get past the, oh, you're not a woman. And yeah, and then we go down the whole, oh, I love insert slur for trans people here. And like, it's just bad.
I mean, I get the same thing. I just got one the other night. My doll and I were laughing about it. That this person is offering to do whatever I want, and I said, well, you could start with respecting my boundaries, because it clearly states in my profile in very large bold print letters that I'm currently not looking for any interactions, casual or otherwise. Um, so maybe like if you're gonna do anything that I want,
Just shut up.
maybe you could start with, I don't know, the most basicest of respect. Like,
It's the wildest stuff. I will not reveal the identity of the person that said this, although it is on my public FetLife. Um, but they were like, I want to be your slave in my comment section. I'm like, cool, I'm not looking for a slave. They were like, I am wanting to be a sissy slur for sex workers for the black community. I want to be black owned and have a black man make all my decisions and totally control. Can you help me? I love, love, love black men and women. It's all I want to be around are black people. And I'm like, so now you've like unconsensually engaged in race play with me on my public profile. No, really? Like 3 days after Juneteenth, you had to come in here and do this. But
wow.
it's amazing to me how people can say that they want to serve and then go ahead and do the exact like, I am now less happy as a person than I was before you came into my life.
Right. Like, even when I was looking for somebody, getting stuff like, I want to do anything you want. And then I'm like,
No,
I mean, that sounds great as an
you could
idea.
die,
What do you
but
mean by that? And, then we get into this conversation about sexual fetishes and all of this fun stuff. And then I'm like, wait a minute, wait a minute, wait a minute. I'm starting to gather that you think I'm a woman. And they're like, well, yeah, I'm looking for
no,
mommy femdom. And I'm like, oh, baby, you're going to be real disappointed.
I don't know.
That's just
I
not,
don't. You're like the manliest guy. No.
I will never understand. I just had to, my doll's mother was here to visit for a couple of days. And we had this whole conversation of like, I don't know how anybody could be in a room with me for 10 minutes and still think I'm a woman. But I mean, some people are just real stuck on what their eyes see, I guess.
Well, what do you like? Even if you look at me, do I look like? I don't know. We've kind of gone off onto the gender tangent. We have about 8 minutes left. Is there anything else that you want to talk about?
Not specifically that I can think of. I
Okay,
mean,
what would you say the most important thing to negotiate for authority transfer is?
areas of authority, hands down. um, Actually having a conversation, even if it's like a 5 minutes per area, 5 minute little mini conversation, like just at least how do you feel about this. um, I've got a book out there that details the areas of control as I see them, um, but really just conversations like, can I control your finances? Do I want you to control my finances? Kind of conversations, and like just talk about medical decisions, talk about physical appearance, talk about time with other people, talk about commitments to the community, commitments to your job, your family, things like that. Just talk about all of the potential areas that a person could control or you could control about a person, and just get a feel for like, how does that work? What does it look like? What do they want? What do you want? Does it match up? Do you want like 100% control and they want you to have 20% control? Then you gotta, work out another like mini negotiation over that thing. Um, but I think that it's one that a lot of people miss, and really just, oh, well, you're in control now. And then, 2 weeks later, there's a decision that needs to be made. And it's like, oh, well, I don't actually want you in charge of that. It's like, oh, but I thought you said total control. Now I'm stuck. So having real conversations about what control looks like in every area or aspect of a person's life, even if it takes weeks or months, or, even if it's just a quick conversation, just something, please.
Yeah, and you would be surprised. Like I I found my like permanent dynamic very recently. However, like I've had some protocols in all of my dynamics that were so like ingrained in me that I got to this dynamic and he's like, I have no interest in like who you play with. Like you don't send people to me for my approval. Just go play. Like if I haven't said anything about them before, do your thing. I don't want to be involved with it. And to me, that I was like, what? Like, oh, like I think it's still on there to like ask my top before asking me for play. Like is I've had that on FetLife since I've had FetLife basically, and he was the first person to be like, no, I don't want that. But like he was also the first person to be like, yeah, I do care about controlling your physical appearance, because like a lot of my dynamics would be like, yeah, I'm super into that. But then when it got down to it, they were like, oh, this is actually kind of boring. I'm not really interested in like the monotony of this. Whereas he's like, yeah, I absolutely care what your hair looks like. I absolutely care what like modifications you have done. Like there's guidelines now about like where I can and can't get tattooed, which was definitely not a thing before. And while I'm super into it, like if you had just dropped that on me without talking about it before like we entered the dynamic, I would have been very upset.
Right. Yeah. I've seen a lot of situations like that, either that just randomly occur because when you don't talk about it and you spend a life together, whatever that life looks like, whether you live together or you share finances or you see each other once every 6 months or whatever, you still share that experience. And, 6 months or a year later, there's inevitably something that comes up. I've had relationships where it's even been as simple as, my partner is starting a new job and they're like, which place should I apply to? I'm like, we didn't talk about that. That's not It's not an area that I control. And so, I mean, I can advise you, I can answer questions and support you, but I'm not going to tell you what to do because we didn't agree to that.
Yep.
um, and I think there's a lot of, from my experience anyways, there's a lot of pressure on the D type to, every time the S type needs something or wants
To
something,
have an
it's
answer ready
almost
to go.
automatically like, you should know,
I
you're the
solved
person
this
in
for you
charge
before
here.
you even thought about it. You're welcome. I am a god.
And I'm like, man, I wish that's how my life worked. But unfortunately, as much as I like to call myself God, I am only but mere mortal over here. So I can't actually like
Mere mortal who is doing a lot. If anyone doesn't know, like Devyn's doing a metric fuck ton all the time.
I do a lot of things. But yeah, I think that for me, having those conversations, especially about what is and is not in your control, and what that person needs from you as far as control, is super important. And weirdly, it's like the main thing that I find that people miss. And I don't quite understand how that happens, but I find that it happens quite a bit.
Yeah. All right. Well, I think we're gonna end it. For anyone interested in getting a hold of Devyn, I'm gonna have him send me his information that I will put in the comments section. But other than that, please tune into our next video. I don't know when I'll have it up, but I will do that soon. Um, anyway, thank you guys for coming. I'm gonna hit stop on the recording, but then we've got like 3 minutes to talk to each other if you have any questions, comments, Devyn. But thank you guys for coming.